The topics and opinions expressed in the following show are solely those of the hosts and their guests and not those of W4CY Radio, its employees, or affiliates. We make no recommendations or endorsements for radio show programs, services, or products mentioned on air or on our web. No liability, explicit or implied, shall be extended to W4CY Radio or its employees or affiliates. Any questions or comments should be directed to those show hosts. Thank you for choosing W4CY Radio.
Are you ready for Insights to Incite? Ready or not, it's showtime. Now get ready to listen in and watch right here on W4CY Radio and Talk4 TV. Join us and together we will escape the mundane. Insights to Incite, here is your host, Brandon Lawson.
According to Rebecca Solnit, this has seized hold of many of us. She goes on to say, in reference to this, a sense that we should be doing something else, no matter what we are doing, or doing at least two things at once, or going to check some other medium. It's an anxiety about keeping up, about not being left out or getting behind. And what does this do to us? It stresses us and zaps us of our energy, amongst other things. Friends, this is Brandon Lawson, your host. I want to thank you for joining me today on another episode of Insights to Incite. We come to you each week on W4CY Radio and Talk4 TV at Thursday, 12 noon Eastern. Today is Thursday, October 21st, and we are on Lesson 2 of our series, Issues That Inhibit Us. Today, I want to speak with you about an emotional issue, or some might classify it as a mental issue. However you classify it, this internal issue, like most other emotional or mental issues or disorders, plagues us relationally, physically, and it can even be a detriment to our bank accounts. Yes, it is a fact. Restlessness is an issue for many. And while its toll may be relatively minor, it can also be quite devastating. So, why is it? Just why is this such an issue? Why does it plague so many amongst society? Any thoughts? And by the way, I'd like to remind you, if you're watching on Talk4 TV or through the app with Talk4 TV, you can always chime in if you want to make any comments. And I can address those, or if you have a question. But why is it that this is such a major issue? Why does it plague so many different people? Well, in short, we could easily say it's because of misplaced priorities. Yes. But, is there something else to that? Well, as you might have guessed, that is what I want to speak with you about today on today's show. And I want to share with you, I recently read a clip from the Leadership Now blog. And this clip states, "We all need white space, open, unassigned time. We need it for better relationships, mental health, and better productivity." It was Juliet Funk who writes in A Minute to Think, "Without space, we cannot sustain ourselves. It is the missing element in our lives, and we need to get it back." Funk suggests that first, we need to take strategic pauses to recuperate, reduce, reflect, and construct. They help us to separate when you can't take long stretches of time to think. Funt uses what she calls the wedge. The wedge is a small portion of white space inserted between two activities. It's used specifically to pry apart actions or events that without it could have been or would have been connected. So, why is it that we don't take these strategic pauses? What gets in the way? Well, we're going to look at this further, and get deeper into this as we go throughout our lesson today. And the author here, Juliet Funt, she speaks of the Thieves of Time. And when we come back from our show, we're going to be looking at these Thieves of Time. But first, I want to step away to our first commercial break.
Are you on the edge of your seat and wanting more? Stay tuned as we go on a quick break, and we'll be right back with more Insights to Incite with Brandon Lawson, right here on W4CY Radio and Talk4TV. Are you seeking a speaker or coach who speaks life into your people? If so, look no further. Brandon Lawson is one who will inspire and motivate his audience, as well as empathize and relate to all. Reach out to Brandon and let him be your speaker and life coach by sending an email to brandon@connectandimpact.net or by calling him at 513-708-1517. Brandon looks forward to speaking with you, to you, and for you. Let's connect and impact today. Insights to Incite, a real show with real-life messages. This show, which can be found on radio, TV, and our podcast, gives us insight to incite us to action and to excellence. Watch and or listen to Insights to Incite live at noon Eastern Time every Thursday on W4CY Radio and Talk4TV. Check out our past episodes on iHeartRadio, YouTube, or anywhere you listen to your podcast. Join us each week, and together we will escape the mundane. We are back with more Insights to Incite, so get ready and tune in to listen and watch. Now, once again, let's join Brandon Lawson.
So, why is it that we fail to take these strategic pauses? And as mentioned, in short, we could just say misplaced priorities. We don't prioritize that as something. But let's look further into this and see what Juliet Funt says about this. As mentioned, she speaks of the Thieves of Time. And what she goes on to say here is the Thieves of Time are the 4 key propellants that drive companies, teams, and human beings at work. And I would even go so far as to saying they drive many people's very livelihood, not just their work, their profession, but their overall life. And these propellants are 1, drive; 2, excellence; 3, information; and 4, activity. Despite being positive and helpful to us in their basic nature, these forces also are the biggest reason white space withers. Funt goes on to say, when taken to extremes, they reduce our effectiveness. And then she helps us to get a picture of what this looks like. We mindlessly accept a meeting invite because we are driven. Or we overtweak a presentation because we want to be excellent. Or we go too deep into dashboards and data because we want to be informed. We impulsively grab the next to do on our list because we feel we should always be active. But what happens when these things become, go overboard and actually spill over from what I would say being an asset to actually being a liability? Well, what happens is that drive could turn into overdrive. The excellence could lead into perfectionism. The information could lead to overload. And activity could lead you into a frenzy. So, what are we to do? How do we help ourselves to stay on par and not, allow it to grow into something more than it should be? I think that's one of the key questions we need to ask, or we need to address, because, as mentioned, these four things within themselves are good, but it's when they, get taken to the extreme that they can be a liability rather than an asset. So, how do we handle this? Well, the author goes on to share 4 questions that we are to ask ourselves. And when speaking of these 4 assets, when they begin to go to the extreme and become a liability, she says this. The first one, drive, being that's an asset within itself, when it starts to spill over into overdrive, the question we need to ask ourselves is there anything I can let go of? Well, how about excellence? When that goes overboard, it can turn into perfectionism. Perfectionism can do more to hinder us than help us. And what question should we really ask at that point? When you sense that your desire to get or your desire to get for excellence could lead into perfectionism, we need to ask, where is good enough good enough? And how about information? When it becomes, reaching the extremity and turning over into overload, then we should ask, what do I truly need to know? And then, as we look at activity, when our activity has us, we're so active, we're, one thing after another that it's turning into a frenzy, we should ask ourselves, what is it that deserves my attention? That idea of using the wedge to create white space, and to see that, if you could put up applying the wedge for us, Roxy. Yes, here we go. And you can see, meetings, it helps to separate your meetings. It keeps you from being overly impulsive. It helps you to take a minute to, reflect before you jump in and take action. You don't just act out of impulse. And your ideas, before you jump right into them, it helps you to stop, to reflect, to recuperate, to think, and hope to plan these out of how these ideas can best be used. And perhaps there's a request being made of you from someone else. If you're so bent on being active and jumping in full bore, you may agree to it, then later wish you hadn't. When you have this white space, applying this wedge here, it gives you the time to think, to plan, to compose yourself, so that you can deliver an answer that that would line up with what you really want to say, rather than just instantly saying, yeah, they're instantly jumping in. And so there you have that. And then next is that other graph on the four. Yes, here we go. The 4 questions that control the thieves of time. As mentioned, drive. The risk is it can lead to overdrive. And then the remedy is that question. Excellence to perfectionism. Information to overload. Activity into frenzy. But going back to that wedge, Juliet Funtz also goes into sharing how she uses the wedge to deal with the mirage of hallucinated urgency. This is the kind of urgency that we manufacture and causes us to constantly and thoughtlessly interrupt our colleagues. Have you been there? Maybe you're the one being interrupted, but you're talking to someone and they look to their cell phone. They say, "Oh, just a minute, I gotta get this," and they are so bent on answering every little thing that's come to their phone instantly, even though you're talking, you're trying to carry conversation. Or maybe you've been the one to turn away from your colleague, your friend who is trying to have conversation. That's what happens when we have this hallucinated urgency, this urgency that we manufacture and cause us to constantly and thoughtlessly interrupt our colleagues, and the kind of urgency that others place on us. Start to deal with it by putting a wedge between what comes to mind and anything we do about it. So there is that wedge. And Funt reveals to us in her book, A Minute to Think. If you could put that up for us, Roxy. There it is. That is her book, A Minute to Think. And she reveals to us in there the core issues that invite the busyness into our lives, and then provides us with practical applications to defeat them. The book itself is that she's writing primarily to working professionals, but people young and old, working or not, deal with these same issues that diminish the quality of their lives. The busyness mindset that we have unintentionally adopted leads to shallow thinking, the acceptance of other people's thinking, and the knee-jerk reactions, that's that impulse, that are so prevalent today. And the answer to our collective busyness is to reclaim our lives, to reclaim our days by freeing up time to think, process, and create. And she has put together this assessment that you can take, and there'll be a link put up here in just a second. It's the Busyness Test. With the Busyness Test, you can take a closer look at your day-to-day activities and habits to help you learn how to uncover more of the crucial space for creativity and strategic thinking. And for more on this subject and on this blog, you can find it for yourself by going to Leadership Now blog. And if we could get that up there, Rox, thank you. And right there you have it, the Leadership Now blog. Or if you don't get that, if you're not able to capture that while it's up, you can always email me or, call. We can get that to you. And we'd love to be able to provide you with that and any other resource that we have that you are interested in. So now, as we think of this issue of restlessness, just what are some other issues that are associated with or related to restlessness? Anything come to mind? Just what happens when you become restless? Or what leads to restlessness? Well, I've listed a few here. One is uneasiness Another would be worry, stress, depression. You might say lack of fulfillment, or a depletion of joy. Plus, we find that feeling unattractive, like you're not good enough, like you don't measure up, or having that need to fit in, to be included. She doesn't believe she's pretty enough, or he's not one of the revered athletes. Well, consider the words of the former First Lady, Michelle Obama. Michelle wrote, pull it up here. Michelle Obama says, being a healthy woman isn't about getting on a scale or measuring your waistline. We need to start focusing on what matters, on how we feel, and how we feel about ourselves. Then consider the words of Salma Hayek, the actress. People often say that beauty is in the eye of the beholder. And I say that the most liberating thing about beauty is realizing that you are the beholder. This empowers us to find beauty in places where others have not dared to look, including inside ourselves. And for the men, as we think of, you may feel like, well, you're not that revered athlete. Well, consider the wisdom of American historian Daniel J. Boorstin. Boorstin recognized that in our world of big names, curiously, our true heroes tend to be anonymous. In the life of this illusion and quasi-illusion, the person of solid virtues, who can be admired for something more substantial than his well-knownness, often proves to be the unsung hero, the teacher, the nurse, the mother, the honest cop, the hard worker at lonely, underpaid, unglamorous, unpublicized jobs. Ladies, consider those words. And while it typically is easy for someone to tell you this, to say this, as opposed to having to live it out and not let the peer pressure or what others might, the treatment others give you, because of your appearance or such. Even though it is easier said than done, I want to encourage you to understand and to live according to this truth, according to what truly matters. And with that said, do understand you should and you really need to take care of yourself. And this is care about all the facets of your health and well-being. And this is not exclusive to ladies, even men. Just because we should look at the heart, as the scripture teaches, that the Lord looks at the heart, not the outer appearance. That doesn't mean that we're to neglect our health, neglect ourselves, and just let our health go down the drain. No, our health and well-being does matter. And men, you don't have to be a star athlete or a rock star to be a hero. Real heroes who stand the test of time rarely are either of these. Typically, they don't live in the limelight. Rarely are they revered by the masses. Many times, what makes you a hero is not just what you do, but also the fact that you don't need the praise. You're willing to do it and as a secret agent of sorts. Do it undercover, not out in the open where everybody has to see. No, that will make an even greater impact on the one you help, because you're not out for the praise, the prestige. You're not looking for the glory. You just want to make a positive difference. Well, that is, at the heart of what should motivate us to do what's right, to make that difference, or it shouldn't be for everyone to see us. I mean, Jesus himself, lashed out at the Pharisees, the scribes, the teachers of the law, because they themselves were known for doing this very thing. The very thing that, of making it known so everybody would see them, would, recognize, what it is that they do. They wanted the praise of men more than the praise of God. And we see this in different sections of the Sermon on the Mount. We can find this in Matthew chapter 5, moving forward through to Matthew chapter 7. But you look at this and, if we look, let's look to chapter 6. When he talks about how to give. In the very first verse of chapter 6, he says, "Be careful not to practice your righteousness in front of people to be seen by them. Otherwise, you will have no reward from your Father in heaven. So whenever you give to the poor, don't sound a trumpet before you as the hypocrites do in the synagogues and on the streets to be applauded by people. I assure you, they've got their reward." But he goes on to say to do it in secret. And when he speaks of how to pray, beginning in verse 5, he says, "Whenever you pray, you must not be like the hypocrites, because they love to pray standing in the synagogues and on the street corners to be seen by people. I assure you, they've got their reward," he says. "But when you pray, go into your private room, shut your door, and pray to your Father who is in secret. And your Father who sees in secret will reward you." And he goes on to say, "When you pray, don't babble like the idolaters, since they imagine they'll be heard for their many words. Don't be like them, because your Father knows the things you need before you ask him." Then later in verse 16, where he speaks of fasting, "Whenever you fast, don't be sad-faced like the hypocrites, for they make their faces unattractive, so their fasting is obvious to people. I assure you, they've got the reward." And he says, when you fast, put oil on your head and wash your face, so that you don't show your fasting to people, but to your Father who sees this, who is in secret. And your Father who sees in secret will reward you. And goes on there, and also in the previous chapter, in chapter 5, as he's speaking of this, before he gets into these various things of what we're not to do and how we're not to do it for show, he says, in speaking of the scribes and the Pharisees and the teachers of the law, before he goes into listing these various things, he says in verse 20, "For I tell you, unless your righteousness surpasses that of the scribes and Pharisees, you will never enter the kingdom of heaven." So we're not to do it to be seen by others. That's not the point. And that is where you find a real hero, a true hero, not the one who's in the limelight looking for the glory. Friends, restlessness is a serious issue. And when we come back, we're going to step away here briefly, but when we come back, I'm going to look at another passage where Jesus is speaking, found in the book of Luke. We're going to go into this further, but first, we're going to step away to our second commercial break, and when we return, we'll get into that.
Wow, that was insightful. Stay tuned as we go on a quick break, and we'll be right back with more Insights to Incite right here on W4CY Radio and Talk 4 TV. Are you seeking a speaker or coach who speaks life into your people? If so, look no further. Brandon Lawson is one who will inspire and motivate his audience, as well as empathize and relate to all. Reach out to Brandon and let him be your speaker and life coach by sending an email to brandon@connectandimpact.net or by calling him at 513-708-1517. Brandon looks forward to speaking with you, to you, and for you. Let's connect and impact today. Insights to Incite, a real show with real-life messages. This show, which can be found on radio, TV, and our podcast, gives us insight to incite us to action and to excellence. Watch and or listen to Insights to Incite live at noon Eastern Time every Thursday on W4CY Radio and Talk4 TV. Check out our past episodes on iHeartRadio, YouTube, or anywhere you listen to your podcast. Join us each week, and together we will escape the mundane. We are back with more Insights to Incite, so get ready and tune in to listen and watch. Now once again, let's join Brandon Lawson.
So as we looked at just a few minutes back, we were looking at in other issues that are associated with or related to restlessness. And I listed, some of them there. And one of them I listed, we can see this if we look closely into this account of this individual who approaches Jesus. I'm going to be reading from Luke chapter 18, if you want to follow along. And I'll be starting in verse 18. This is about the rich young ruler. A ruler asked him, "Good teacher, what must I do to inherit eternal life?" "Why do you call me good?" Jesus asked him. "No one is good but one, God. You know the commandments. Do not commit adultery. Do not murder. Do not steal. Do not bear false witness. Honor your father and mother." "I have kept all these from my youth," he said. When Jesus heard this, he told him, "You still lack one thing. Sell all that you have and distribute it to the poor, and you will have treasure in heaven. Then come follow me." And that's the extent of what I'm going to read out of that. I'm not really going to read that whole section because there is many lessons within that section and that we can draw. But there's only really one part I want to really hint at from that speaks to what we're going through or what we're talking about here. And that is, if you noticed, this guy's wealthy. That means he has plenty of money, plenty of possessions. He's not hurting by any means. And, and yet he says, he approaches Jesus, "What must I do to inherit eternal life?" And Jesus lists the commandments. Yet this guy's kept all of them from his youth. So why would he be asking if that's something he's kept all along, or ever since he was a young child? Are there any thoughts? I believe if we can use our imagination and sort of see the setting, the scenario here. This guy's got plenty. He's not hurting. He's not, struggling to get by. And he's kept all these commands. And Jesus says, that's what you do. When he asks about, what must I do to inherit eternal life? And yet he's kept them all since he was a young kid. So why would he even come to Jesus, and be asking that? Well, I believe what we're seeing here is, this is a person that while he's done what's right and he's got plenty, and that, he's still, there's something within him that's just doesn't seem right. It's like he doesn't have that fulfillment. He's got plenty of possessions. He's got plenty of money, got plenty of that. He's been obedient. Yet there's something within him that says something's missing. He has this uneasiness. There's still a sense of emptiness within him. Therefore, he approaches Jesus. Good teacher, what must I do? So we can draw from this that, even if we have plenty in our accounts, our bank accounts and investments, plenty in possessions, assets, we can be totally debt free and have a substantial amount of funds and possessions to our name, yet still feel like we're lacking. Still, we're not fulfilled. We may even feel empty. And just because, you're obedient doesn't mean that, you're suddenly going to be filled to the brim, that you're not going to have a vacant. You're not going to, doesn't mean that because you're good and you do what you should, that there won't be this vacuum within you, this hole. Because the fact of the matter is, there is a hole in many of us. And that hole is not something we ourselves can fill. And that hole is HOLE, not WHOLE. We're talking about a hole, as you imagine this, this empty space. And we see that in this young man. So he comes and he asks Jesus, what must I do? Friend, do you have this struggle? Maybe it's not that hole, that emptiness, but do you struggle with the issue of restlessness? I mean, I know that I can answer for myself. And while I don't know about you, I know that I do with specific things. And one thing that stands out the most that really I struggle, I get restless because it's really bothersome to me. And that has to do with the church. And I'm not here to harp on God's people, but the mediocre elementary teachings to their adults is basically the same as what is taught to the fourth and fifth graders. And I find this to be very troublesome. I mean, I could say it's insulting at the very least. I mean, I'm not suggesting that they make up some falsity, make up doctrine that's not even true, but there's so much more. I just would, it would be nice if they had some, teachings they could bring that involve deeper truths, that go to a deeper level, a more advanced teachings. When us who are 40 or 50 should be past, the need to have a bottle put to our mouth. In Hebrews 5, we see specifically in verses 12 through 14, we see this passage that talks about the need where we should be beyond being spiritual babes. We should be beyond spiritual milk. It says, for though by this time you ought to be teachers, you need someone to teach you again the first principles of the oracles of God, and you have come to need milk and not solid food. For everyone who partakes only of milk is unskilled in the word of righteousness, for he is a babe. But solid food belongs to those who are of full age, that is, those who by reason of use have their senses exercised to discern both good and evil. And while there are some adults that are more advanced, I am truly convinced that there would be so many more that would be more advanced if the church actually taught deeper truths. I also see how bringing the same old, that's one of the main reasons, or one of the big reasons, if not the main. It's one of the big reasons people leave the church, because the church has no more to teach them or to give them. It's just same old, same old. And that's why I try to go a bit deeper in my lessons as I teach them. I like to be able to bring something out that isn't, something you've heard over and over and over. Have you ever heard it? Perhaps. I'm not here to say that I brought something totally profound and you've never heard what I have to say. Yet I try not to bring something that is so common that it's actually mundane. That's why Roxy, when she gives the commercial, as you use here in between when we step away to our commercial breaks, she speaks of, join on insights to incite, as I incite us to action and excellence. And join us, and together we will escape the mundane. Try to get beyond the mundane, the mediocre, the elementary stuff. We want something more. And when seeing this mundane elementary teaching, I get very bored by it, and it turns itself over into restlessness. I can even be impatient if I'm not careful. I have to guard myself against that. But seeing that, I even think that in many respects, this is an outright aberration to God Himself. I mean, He expects His people, 35 years later, to be able to know something more than what they were being taught at the very beginning. Yet the church, being that the body doesn't push for any deeper teachings, the leadership doesn't insert, or it isn't pressed to provide any deeper teachings, and it never comes. The ministers, the elders, the leaders can just coast. They don't have to learn anymore. They can they've done their studies and hardly have to study to make it happen. But that is my situation. That is my struggle. And friends, chances are you struggle with restlessness in some way or another. And I just want to encourage us to consider the message that we've heard today. Let's try it. Let's put these principles into practice and see where we are, say, come 2022. Will you join me? Will you do me a favor? I'd ask that you together with myself, that we would help one another, that we would check in on each other, that would be an encouragement to one another and accountability for one another in these respects. You can reach me at brandon@connectandimpact.net. And you can also reach me at the following phone number, 513-708-1517. If prompted, please leave me a message. Friends, God Himself, the Father, set for us an example that we are to rest. He created the heavens and the earth, made all of creation in 6 days, and rested on the seventh. And He has set that as a reminder to us. And plus, like I mentioned, all this could be summed up in a brief synopsis to say that why we don't take these strategic pauses is because our priorities are misplaced. They're out of whack. And what should our priorities be? Well, the scripture tells us in Matthew 6:33 that we should seek ye first the kingdom of God and His righteousness, and all these things will be added to us, will be added to you. So, friends, let's do ourselves a favor. Let's obey God. You can find the example He gives us where it's mentioned in how we're to honor the Sabbath in Exodus 20, verses 8 through 11. And then also Matthew 6:33, there's where our priorities should be. If we seek first His kingdom, we will also take time to rest. To rest, as that rest is what gives us the restoration we need. It's what helps us to be replenished so that we can come forth and be revived again, be ready, so we can be full strength, so we will not be worn down, drained, empty, and dragging along. Let's be our best, if not for ourselves, then for Him, for our families. Friends, I realize that you're not always going to agree with everything I have to say. I mean, it's a given that you and I will not always see eye to eye on everything. Nonetheless, I do invite you to join me each and every week, every Thursday at 12 noon Eastern on W4CY Radio and Talk 4 TV for another episode of Eye to Eye, Insights to Incite. We thank you for joining us, and we look forward to having you again. Thank you.
Wow, what an insightful show. Thanks for listening in and watching today. If you missed any part of today's show or any other episode, check it out on iHeartRadio, YouTube, or anywhere you listen to your podcast. Now take today's insight and utilize it. Incite yourself to action and to excellence in the week ahead, and join us again next Thursday and every Thursday at 12 noon Eastern Time for another insightful session with Brandon Lawson as he speaks to us and shares some more insights to incite right here on W4CY Radio and Talk 4 TV.